Far away from Earth, beyond the bright stars and swirling galaxies, there was a small alien colony living in peace. The colony was built on a green planet that circled a quiet sun. Its people were simple, not warriors, not conquerors, just a species trying to survive and grow. They had farms, homes, schools, and dreams, just like humans did once in their early years. For decades, they lived without fear, believing their corner of the galaxy was too small and unimportant to ever attract danger. But they were wrong. One day, their skies turned dark with the arrival of a ruthless raiding species. These raiders were infamous across sectors for striking weak colonies, stripping them of resources and leaving nothing but ruins behind. When their ships entered orbit, the colony's alarms rang out. The people rushed to their shelters, their leaders gathered in panic, and the defense forces tried to mount a response. But their technology was outdated, their ships too few, their weapons too weak. Within hours, their defense line collapsed. Buildings burned, communication towers were destroyed, and fear spread through every street and home. Mothers clutched their children, elders prayed, and the soldiers who survived knew they could not stop what was coming. The leaders of the colony gathered in their central hall, desperation in their eyes. They argued, shouted, and tried to think of a solution. Some said they should surrender, though everyone knew the raiders showed no mercy. Others said they should flee, but there was nowhere to run, no ships fast enough to outrun their attackers. Finally, in the middle of this chaos, one of the advisors brought up the idea of sending out a universal distress signal. It was something their ancestors had built long ago, never truly expecting it would save them. The device could send a desperate call across the stars, using frequencies that any advanced civilization could hear. But no one believed help would ever come. Still, it was their last hope. The colony leaders agreed. The signal was activated and a message was sent out into the blackness of space. It was not a detailed plea, just a simple cry for help, carrying the coordinates of their dying world. As the signal left their planet and traveled through the void, many of the leaders sat in silence. They knew deep in their hearts that it was likely meaningless. Who would come for them? Who would risk their fleets, their soldiers, their lives for a small forgotten colony? Most species in the galaxy avoided trouble, and those who were strong often demanded a price for their aid. For the colony, the distress signal was like a scream into emptiness. The mothers hiding in their homes never believed anyone would hear it. The children whispered questions to their parents. Will someone come? And the parents did not know how to answer. The soldiers who were still alive felt guilt that they could not protect their people, and the leaders sat in despair, waiting for the end. Their only comfort was that they had at least tried. Their voices had been thrown into the universe even if the stars never answered, but something unexpected happened. The signal traveled farther than they thought it ever could. It passed through dust clouds across star systems and beyond the borders of the known. Finally, it reached a planet that most of the galaxy knew of but never dared to approach. Earth. Earth was not like other worlds. Across the galaxy, its name carried weight, both in whispers of fear and in cautious respect. To many alien species, Earth was known as a death world, a place where life itself was brutal and merciless. Its storms were violent, its predators were fierce, and even its smallest insects could kill. Yet out of this unforgiving environment, one species had risen: humans. They were strong, clever, and stubborn beyond reason. They did not just survive challenges, they grew stronger because of them. Where other species would give up, humans would adapt. Where others would hide, humans would fight. This made them dangerous but also unique. For centuries, rumors had spread about humanity's actions in the galaxy. They were explorers, traders, and sometimes warriors. They had earned both allies and enemies, but one thing was always clear. If humans decided to act, they acted with full force. Other civilizations called them unpredictable, too emotional, too reckless. Yet behind those criticisms there was a hidden truth that many feared to admit. Humans did not ignore a cry for help. So, when the alien colony's signal reached Earth, it did not vanish into silence. It was intercepted by one of Earth's listening arrays, massive structures that constantly scanned deep space for any unusual transmissions. The technicians who first saw the signal thought it was a mistake. The words were simple, broken, desperate: "Help us." Coordinates attached. But when they checked the origin, they found it was real. A colony under attack, lives on the edge of destruction, calling out to anyone who might hear. Within hours, the message spread through Earth's networks. Leaders debated what to do, military officers examined the coordinates, and ordinary people across the planet followed the news with wide eyes. For some, the choice seemed obvious. Why risk their people for strangers so far away? But for others, the answer was just as clear, because no one else would. Earth had been weak once, a long time ago. Humanity had known war, famine, and fear. They remembered what it felt like to be helpless, to cry out and hear nothing back. That memory shaped them. They swore that if another voice ever cried out in the dark, they would not let it fade unanswered, and so, while the alien colony believed their message was only a final cry into the void, they had unknowingly reached the one world where such cries were never ignored. Earth, the death world of legends, had heard them, and humanity was already moving. When Earth's deep space listening arrays picked up the alien SOS, it was like hearing a faint cry in the middle of a storm. At first, the technicians thought it was interference, just another strange signal from the background of space. But when they cleaned the data and translated the message, the words became clear. It was a desperate call, broken and rushed, but filled with urgency. Someone, somewhere in the galaxy, was under attack and begging for help. The technicians froze, staring at the glowing letters on their screens. They knew this was no ordinary message. It was a real plea for survival. The discovery was immediately sent to higher command. Within hours, the signal reached the offices of the United Terran Fleet, Earth's strongest military and exploration force. The officers studied the coordinates, traced the signal's origin, and confirmed the truth. A colony of aliens far from Earth was under siege. Their enemies were powerful raiders who would not stop until nothing was left alive. For many officers, the choice was obvious. Action had to be taken. But decisions of this scale were not so simple. The message had to go through Earth's leaders, and politics, as always, made everything complicated. The politicians gathered in a massive chamber, their voices echoing as they debated the situation. Some argued that it was not Earth's responsibility. Why should humans risk their fleets and their people for an alien colony they had never met? The galaxy was wide and there were dangers everywhere. If Earth rushed to every cry, their own resources would eventually be drained. Others argued that humanity had already fought enough wars in its past. Why invite another one, especially against unknown enemies? Fear lingered in their words, a reminder that humanity's reputation as a death world species often made them targets. But not everyone agreed. There were voices in the chamber who stood tall and firm, reminding everyone of the promise humanity had made. It was a promise written not on paper, but in the hearts of the people. Long ago, humanity had sworn that no cry for help would go unanswered. They had once been weak, once been desperate, once been ignored by those who could have saved them. That memory was carved deep into their history. And now, when others were calling out in the dark, Earth could not simply turn away. Outside the chamber, ordinary people followed the news with growing passion. The distress call had been released to the public and the words touched billions. People saw themselves in that cry, imagining what it would feel like to wait for death and not know if anyone was listening. Across cities, towns, and settlements, discussions spread. Should humanity step in? Should they risk everything? And slowly a wave of determination rose. People remembered who they were, where they came from, and the oath they had carried for generations. Earth was not perfect, but one thing defined them. When someone called for help, they answered. This pressure from the people could not be ignored. Leaders who hesitated soon realized that hesitation itself was dangerous. If humanity did nothing, the galaxy would see them as cowards. Worse, humans themselves would see their leaders as betrayers of their word. The decision became clear. Earth would answer, not with half measures, not with a token force, but with everything required to make sure the cry was not in vain. Orders spread like fire through the ranks of the United Terran Fleet. Shipyards came alive with activity. Crews rushed to their stations. Captains prepared their vessels for long journeys into hostile space. Soldiers and medics loaded supplies, weapons, and aid packages. Massive hangars echoed with the roar of engines as carriers, battleships, and escorts began to mobilize. Within days, what had been a desperate plea on a distant screen became a real mission. Humanity was moving, and when humanity moved, it never moved quietly. The fleet that assembled was not small. Hundreds of ships, from heavy war cruisers to swift medical vessels, gathered in formation. It was not just a show of strength, it was a declaration of intent. Humanity did not believe in sending small forces to test the waters. When they committed fully. To them, mercy was not a word spoken in half-hearted tones. Mercy was action. Mercy was sacrifice. Mercy was overwhelming. The alien colony that had sent the SOS had no idea yet that their signal had been heard. To them, their message had been a whisper into emptiness, but far across the galaxy, their words had ignited something powerful. An entire world had listened, and that world was now on its way with a fleet vast enough to shake the stars. As the ships prepared to jump into faster-than-light travel, the officers gave their final orders. Communications officers transmitted one last message to Earth. We move for mercy. We move for survival. We move because humanity does not turn away. These words spread among the crew members, lifting spirits and sharpening determination. Every person aboard those ships knew why they were leaving home. They were not going to conquer, not to claim, not to expand. They were going because someone was crying for help, and they could not let that cry go unanswered. For the raiders attacking the alien colony, it was just another ordinary victory. They laughed as they destroyed defenses, gathered spoils, and prepared to finish their work. They thought no one would interfere. But in the silent depths of space, engines roared and stars bent as a fleet of humans approached. They did not yet know that Deathworlders had heard the cry. They did not yet know that mercy, when carried by humanity, always came with overwhelming force. The politicians who once doubted now watched in awe as Earth's fleet stretched out like endless constellations of steel and fire. The people who demanded action cheered, proud that their species still lived by its promise. And somewhere far away, a small alien colony, still hiding and trembling, waited for a miracle they no longer believed possible. That miracle was already on its way. The alien raiders believed their victory was already certain. They had crushed the weak defenses of the colony, destroyed most of their small fleet, and reduced their communication towers to rubble. Smoke rose from cities. Frightened civilians hid underground, and the raiders laughed as they circled the planet, waiting to finish the slaughter. To them, this was nothing more than another easy raid. They had done it many times before. Arrive suddenly, burn everything in sight, steal what they wanted, and leave nothing behind but ashes. No one ever stopped them. No one ever dared. But then, something changed. In the vast silence of space, the raiders' sensors began to sound alarms. Strange readings appeared. Distortions in the fabric of faster-than-light travel. At first, the raider commanders ignored it. They thought it was a trick, or maybe interference from the colony's failing systems. But the readings grew stronger. Then suddenly the darkness of space lit up. Hundreds of massive human warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel, their hulls glowing with energy, their weapons fully armed. To the colony below, the sight was unbelievable. One moment the skies were filled only with the shapes of their enemies. The next moment the heavens themselves seemed to split open. Fire, steel, and light poured into orbit. It was as if a wall of titans had arrived, stretching across the stars, blocking out the darkness. Mothers holding their children looked up at the strange sight through cracks in their shelters. Soldiers who had lost all hope stood frozen, their mouths open in disbelief. The colony had thought no one would come, yet now an armada unlike anything they had ever seen filled their skies. For the raiders, shock turned quickly to fear. They had expected no resistance, but here was a fleet larger than anything they had ever faced. The humans did not send envoys. They did not waste time with negotiations or warnings. Within minutes of arrival, the Terran fleet launched its first strike. Swarms of fighters shot forward like arrows from a burning bow. Beams of light cut across the darkness, tearing into the raiders' ships with surgical precision. Explosions ripped through the raider formations. Ships that had once seemed invincible to the colony were reduced to flaming wrecks in moments. Humanity had arrived not with hesitation, but with overwhelming force. Their strategy was clear: hit fast, hit hard, and leave no chance for the enemy to regroup. While the raiders scrambled in panic, human cruisers and destroyers moved into perfect formation. They cut through the raider fleet like blades slicing paper. Every attempt the raiders made to fight back was crushed under the sheer coordination and firepower of the humans. Where raider missiles launched, human defenses intercepted them. Where raiders tried to flee, human ships blocked their path. It was not a battle. It was a dismantling. On the ground, the terrified aliens of the colony watched the spectacle unfold. They could hardly believe their eyes. A few hours ago, they had been certain that death was the only thing waiting for them. Now the very enemies who had hunted them were being torn apart before their eyes. Children peeked out of hiding places, their fear slowly turning into wonder. Elders whispered prayers of thanks. Soldiers who had believed their fight meaningless began to cry with relief. Hope, which had been lost, returned in a flood. The humans fought with a style that was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. There was no mercy for the raiders, no pause, no weakness. The Terran fleet had come not to negotiate or to threaten. They had come to end the threat completely. Ship after ship of the raider armada exploded, pieces of burning metal scattering across the void. In the control rooms of the colony, the leaders stared at the battle through trembling hands. They had heard stories of humans, stories of their strength, their stubbornness, their brutality when provoked. But to see it with their own eyes was something entirely different. It was like watching a storm given form, a hurricane of fire and steel unleashed upon the galaxy. Within hours, what had seemed like certain extinction was completely reversed. The raiders, once confident in their easy victory, were reduced to wreckage drifting lifeless in orbit. Their command ships were destroyed, their escape routes cut off, and their armies scattered. Those who tried to run were hunted down by swift human vessels. Those who fought were obliterated. By the time the last raider ship fell silent, the humans had claimed the skies above the colony. For the people of the colony, the silence after the battle felt unreal. They stepped out from their shelters, their eyes wide as they looked at the massive human ship still hanging above their world. The air was filled with smoke and ash, but also with something they had thought gone forever: safety. They had not just survived, they had been saved. But the way they were saved would never be forgotten. The humans had not come gently. They had not offered half-hearted protection. They had struck with all their strength, as if the colony's survival was their own. To the aliens, it was both comforting and terrifying. Comforting because they were alive. Terrifying because they realized just how much power humanity carried. The children of the colony would remember the moment forever, the day when the sky cracked open and giants of fire descended to drive away death. The soldiers who had once accepted defeat would never forget the sight of human warships blotting out the stars, fighting with a fury that made the raiders look small and weak. And the leaders, who had sent out what they believed was a hopeless cry, now understood that someone had been listening all along. What had seemed like the end became the beginning of a story that would be told across the stars. Humanity had arrived, and when they arrived, they did not come with words. They came with fleets, with fire, and with the unstoppable force of a species that had learned long ago never to let desperation go unanswered. The colony could hardly believe that the nightmare was over. Just hours earlier, they had been certain that their homes, their families, and their entire world would be wiped out by the raiders. Now, instead of destruction, their skies were filled with massive human warships. The invaders had been completely crushed, their fleets scattered and destroyed with ruthless efficiency. The humans had not only won, they had done so with such overwhelming force that the raiders never even had a chance. The people of the colony gathered in streets and shelters, whispering in disbelief. They were alive, but they did not yet know what their survival truly meant. From the surface, the view of the human fleet was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. The ships were enormous, lined with glowing weapons and bristling with technology the colony had never seen before. They moved with perfect precision, holding formation so sharp it seemed as if the entire armada was one single being. Smaller vessels darted between the larger ships, scanning for danger, securing debris, and making sure no raider survivors escaped. To the frightened aliens, it felt like the humans were not just protecting them, they were sealing the entire star system in an unbreakable cage. At first, there was silence. The colonists did not know if the humans would even acknowledge them. They had seen how swiftly the fleet had destroyed their enemies, and that kind of power carried its own shadow. Some whispered that perhaps the humans had not come to save them at all, but to conquer them. Others argued that no conqueror would fight with such fury against the raiders just to turn on the helpless afterward. Fear mixed with gratitude, creating an uneasy tension in every heart. Then the first human dropships descended. Massive vessels broke away from the fleet and landed on the surface with thunderous engines. Soldiers in armor stepped out, moving in disciplined lines, scanning the surroundings as if expecting another ambush. The colonists hid at first, peering from doorways and broken walls, unsure of what these strange saviors would do. But alongside the soldiers came others, humans carrying crates of supplies, medics rushing with scanners and medicine, engineers hauling equipment to rebuild damaged power lines and water systems. Slowly, the people began to emerge from hiding. The humans wasted no time. Teams moved across the colony with astonishing coordination. Food was distributed in organized lines. Water filters were set up in public squares, and temporary shelters were built with machines that unfolded into solid structures in minutes. Human doctors, using advanced medical tools, treated burns, wounds, and sickness. Children who had been starving for days were given meals, and families who had been torn apart were reunited under the watchful eyes of human soldiers. To the colony, it felt like a miracle, yet it was a miracle that carried weight. The presence of the soldiers was constant. Everywhere the colonists turned, they saw armored figures standing guard, weapons ready, scanning the skies for danger. Though these humans were not threatening the civilians, their very presence was intimidating. They looked like predators waiting in silence, able to strike at any moment. Gratitude filled the hearts of the colonists for the aid they were receiving, but unease grew as well. It was impossible to forget that these same people had just annihilated an entire raider fleet, as if it were nothing. For the leaders of the colony, the feelings were even more complicated. They met with human commanders in tense gatherings, trying to understand the intentions behind this overwhelming show of strength. The commanders were respectful but firm. They explained that the Terran fleet would remain in the system for as long as it was necessary to ensure the safety of the colony. They spoke of rebuilding, of protecting trade routes, of securing space against any future raids. Their words were reasonable, even kind. Yet the tone of authority was clear. This was not a negotiation. The humans had decided what was best, and the colony had little choice but to accept. Some leaders felt relief. After all, without the humans, they would all be dead. What right did they have to question their saviors? But others felt unsettled. Their colony had always been independent, small though it was. Now with humans everywhere, it felt less like independence and more like living inside someone else's storm. The humans were not cruel, but their presence was overwhelming, like a tidal wave that had swept in and refused to leave. Among the people, stories began to spread. Some told tales of human kindness, how a soldier had carried a lost child back to her parents, how a doctor had saved a life with medicine the colony had never seen before, how engineers had restored power to an entire district in a single day. Others told tales of human power, how their ships could destroy armies in minutes, how their soldiers stood like statues with eyes that missed nothing, how every movement they made seemed calculated and unstoppable. Gratitude and fear became tangled together until the two were impossible to separate. At night, many colonists lay awake, staring at the sky. The stars were hidden by the massive shapes of human ships, their lights blinking like watchful eyes. For some, it was comforting to know those ships were there, guarding them against future threats. For others, it felt like being trapped under the gaze of something too big, too powerful to ever resist. The humans had saved them, but they had also reminded them how small and fragile they truly were. Children played again in the streets, holding packets of food stamped with human symbols. Families rebuilt their homes with human tools. Life returned piece by piece, yet always under the shadow of the fleet above. The colony owed its survival to the humans, but no one could ignore the fact that survival had come at the price of dependence. They were alive, yes, but they were also living under the shadow of a force that could decide their fate at any moment. In the weeks that followed, the humans continued to provide help, but their methods never softened. Every action was precise, every move controlled. The colony was safe, but it was also watched. The people spoke in hushed tones, grateful for every meal and every act of healing, but quietly wondering what would happen when the humans finally decided their mission was complete. Would they leave the colony alone? Or would they remain, forever tying this small world to their unstoppable storm? And so the colony lived in two truths at once: awe for the humans who had saved them, and fear of the same humans whose power was so great that it could not be ignored. Their survival had been certain extinction turned into salvation. But salvation, when it came in the hands of Deathworlders, carried its own weight. It was like being pulled from drowning waters only to find yourself standing at the edge of a roaring sea. They were alive, yes, but they would never forget the storm that had saved them, nor the shadow it left behind. The battle had ended, but its echoes did not remain confined to one small colony. News of what had happened spread across the galaxy at a speed faster than light itself. Merchant ships carried the story to trading posts. Smugglers whispered it in dark corners of spaceports, and diplomats carried it into the halls of great empires. Everywhere the tale was told, it changed shape, but the heart of it remained the same. A small colony cried for help, and humanity came not with words, not with treaties, but with a fleet so vast it turned certain death into sudden salvation. For some civilizations, this story was received with awe and even gratitude. To them, humans became a new kind of legend, protectors of the weak, guardians of those who had no one else to defend them. Small colonies in dangerous parts of space began to see Earth not as a distant, strange world, but as a beacon. "If we fall," they whispered, "perhaps the Deathworlders will hear us too." Merchants told stories of how humans brought not only weapons, but food and medicine. Healers and engineers walked alongside soldiers, lifting the broken as they destroyed the enemy. These civilizations admired that kind of mercy. To them, it was proof that in a cold and uncaring galaxy, there existed a species that refused to let cries of desperation go unanswered. But admiration was not the only response. In the grand councils of powerful empires, the story was received with fear. Leaders leaned forward in their chairs as they listened to reports of entire raider fleets wiped out in hours. They studied grainy images of massive human warships blotting out the skies of the colony. They saw not mercy, but a warning. If humans responded with such overwhelming force to a simple distress signal, what would they unleash if their own world was threatened? What would they do if an empire crossed them? These leaders trembled behind their confident faces, knowing that the humans had shown the galaxy a glimpse of their true power, and that power was terrifying. Even among neutral civilizations, the reaction was mixed. Scholars debated endlessly about what humanity's actions meant. Some said it proved that humans were saviors, a unique species that turned their violent nature into protection for others. Others argued that salvation and destruction were the same when it came to humans, that their mercy always walked hand in hand with fire and steel. To be saved by them was also to be changed by them, because wherever humans went, peace was never gentle. It was enforced through strength. In the colony that had been saved, these debates meant little compared to their own lived experience. The people there had seen death coming for them. They had felt the terror of helplessness, the certainty of extinction, and they had seen the skies split open with a human armada, turning that certain death into life. For them, there was only one truth that mattered. Their cry for help had been answered. No one else came. No other power lifted a hand. Only the humans had heard, and only the humans had acted. They were alive because of it. And yet, even as they rebuilt their homes with human tools, even as they ate food provided by human ships, they could not forget the shadow of that fleet. Gratitude lived in their hearts, but unease grew beside it, like a second voice whispering that such power could never be without cost. As months passed, the event became part of galactic memory. In schools across star systems, children learned of the day the humans answered a cry with an armada. In military academies, officers studied the battle as an example of overwhelming force and perfect precision. In quiet conversations, traders and explorers wondered what it meant for the future. Would humans become the galaxy's greatest shield or its greatest storm? No one could say for certain. What everyone knew was that the galaxy would never see humans the same way again. For the powerful, the lesson was clear. Provoking humans was dangerous beyond measure. No empire wanted to imagine what might happen if they pushed Earth too far. For the weak, the lesson was equally clear. If all else failed, if no one else listened, perhaps it was worth sending a signal into the stars. Because the humans might come, and if they did, survival would be certain. But certainty came with a price. Peace, once restored by human hands, never felt the same. It was a peace carried by fleets, a peace under watchful eyes, a peace that reminded everyone of the storm that had swept through. Some saw this as safety, others saw it as domination. But either way, no one could deny its power. In time, the saying spread across the galaxy like a warning etched into the stars. If the Deathworlders answer, you will live, but you will never live the same. It was not spoken with anger or praise, but with the quiet recognition of truth. Humanity had shown the galaxy that their mercy was real, but it was not gentle. Their salvation was swift, but it came with thunder. Their kindness could not be separated from their strength. The rescued colony lived as proof of that truth. They thrived again. Their children grew. Their cities were rebuilt, but they told their story carefully. When their descendants asked what happened on the day of the raid, they spoke with both pride and fear. They said, "We cried into the dark and the humans heard us. They came like a storm and they saved us." But the storm never truly left. From that day forward, no distress signal in the galaxy was sent without a second thought. Every species knew that if humans were the ones to hear it, salvation would come. But so would change. They had turned one colony's hopeless whisper into survival, but in doing so, they had also changed the meaning of mercy forever.